Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Church Dogmatics by Emil Brunner, first published in German in 1946. We're going to look at chapter 8, pages 107 to 117, and we're going to talk about the theological turn. Remember, Karl Barth, if you remember the introduction, Karl Barth first was trained as a liberal theologian, but he found that as a pastor, he couldn't help his parishioners with his liberal proclamations, and he made a dramatic theological turn and became an evangelical, and that's when he turned to the book of Romans and gave us his commentary on Romans. Let's go to block 1 and get started. New structures emerge for today's church. New missionary structures emerge. In Germany, they were called the home missions. They emphasized love and service and fellowship in the living word, calling it diaconia, service of the brethren. Transcendence through action emerged, which meant that there was a promotion of love, service, and Christian character, and youth evangelism within a spirit of ecclesia as koinonia, fellowship. But transcendence became an area of participation. Praxis. Remember, praxis is action and reflection in ministry. So transcendence was discovered in the midst of mission. Now, in America, the spirit of ecclesia, in our environment, and we know this to be true, the socialized church has emerged. Now the churches try to make themselves accessible to the community. They promote koinonia, fellowship, and new forms of social activity are emerging in the American church. And that's very true of the church I attend. We very much practice making ourselves accessible to the community and participating in the needs of the community. So that's a very good description of what's going on in America. Now, block 2 is always your key moment for a lesson, and we're going to talk about the theological turn from liberalism to conservative evangelical theology. A very dramatic turn in Germany. 19th century liberalism. The Enlightenment brought socialism and individualism, and socialism was without a transcendent God. Transcendence was no longer taught, transcendence was lost. And government passed through a neo-Marxism, and in areas like some areas of Europe, the communist state emerged, and a neo-Marxist socialism exploited Asia and Africa. And that has been the legacy of 19th century liberalism. Now, in Germany in the 20th century, early 20th century, there was a turn, a theological turn. The evangelical academies emerged in Germany. They sought a renewal of the church. They sought to practice true koinonia fellowship, and they created what Brunner calls a paradox of social form. And they did reawaken an interest in the biblical message, and this early 20th century is when Barth's also went through a theological turn in his thinking, and he began a reinvestigation of the book of Romans and wrote his commentary on Romans. So very significant transition. The failure of liberalism led to a radical theological turn in Germany, and conservative evangelical theology became desperately grasped and affirmed, and that included Karl Barth. He was raised and taught to be the new shining liberal theologian, and he dramatically did a 180 and took up conservative evangelical theology and turned to the book of Romans in order to discover that conservative evangelical theology. And we've been blessed with his commentary ever since. Now, block 3, Brunner says, these new structures that have emerged in Germany and in America, and the very important theological turn away from liberalism to conservative evangelical theology, results in a 4-point summary. From the world, persons are seeking fellowship, but they don't really know the true meaning of fellowship, but they're seeking some kind of a personal fellowship. From the church declares that this true fellowship is found in Christ. The church proclaims true fellowship is found in Christ. True communion is found in Christ. Now, how are the two brought together? Brunner says, by faith in action as agape. Only through agape, self-sacrificial love, will the two be brought together. And that can happen in a very different arena of possibilities. It can take many, many different forms. There are a variety of possibilities open to us. But for Brunner, these new structures of the church need to either initiate, or if they have already initiated it, they need to continue practicing agape, self-sacrificial love, and promoting true communion. And definitely reaffirming the theological turn from liberalism, from 19th century liberalism, to a new affirmation of conservative evangelical theology. And for Brunner, his person to follow was Karl Barth. I also followed Karl Barth, and I also followed Barth's successor, Jürgen Moltmann. But Barth, Brunner, Moltmann, Bonhoeffer, they all made that radical affirmation of conservative evangelical theology. They did it in different ways. Moltmann was very eschatological in his emphasis, more so than Barth, more so than Brunner. But they all had a very conservative evangelical outlook, every one of them. Let's do a really quick recap here. We'll go to block 1. And let's look at block note 3, the spirit of the church in America. Because this is very true, the socialized church has emerged in America. The church makes itself accessible to the needs of the community. It offers and it promotes koinonia fellowship, and in a variety of new forms. So many different ways, but it becomes a socialized church in America. That is very true. Very true. Now, block 2, let's take a look at note 2, the theological turn. At the beginning of the 20th century, evangelical academies emerged. There was a renewal of the church, a renewal of true fellowship, and it took on a very paradoxical social form. There was a reawakened interest in the biblical message, the gospel, and even Karl Barth turned from liberalism to a very conservative evangelical theology when he turned to the book of Romans and wrote his commentary on Romans, which was a personal self-discovery for Karl Barth. And the conclusion in block 3, that these new structures and this theological turn will bring the world and the church together if they practice faith in action as agape. By practicing faith in action as agape, as self-sacrificial love. But it's really important to understand that the neo-Orthodox movement, it emerged out of a tremendous 180 theological turn. Karl Barth is the father of neo-Orthodoxy, and he was trained in Germany, Harnack, Hermann, trained to be a liberal theologian, but as a pastor, he just couldn't accept it. He made a dramatic change, became a very conservative evangelical, and turned to the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul, to rediscover faith in Christ. And it radically altered his theological thinking. And the book of Romans was the birth of the neo-Orthodox movement, and Barth rediscovered the transcendence of God, and he rediscovered the paradox of a God who is transcendent and yet abides with us. And that became a tremendously powerful commentary. I mean, the book of Romans, it shook the theological world. And it also caused Karl Barth to protest Hitler, along with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he was exiled because of that protest, along with Bonhoeffer. But Bonhoeffer returned to Germany, rejoined the underground. He was eventually executed in a concentration camp by the Nazis. But this theological turn is very significant in German theology. It completely, Karl Barth became an entirely new person. Radically turned 180 degrees from 19th century liberalism to conservative evangelical theology, and he proclaimed Christ crucified, and he proclaimed transcendent God as the God who is also with us in Christ. That's going to wrap up a very brief chapter, chapter 8, but very powerful, because this is where we get the picture of how did neo-Orthodox theology emerge. It emerged through the great theological turn of early 20th century, away from liberalism toward conservative evangelical theology. That'll wrap up 107 to 117. Next time we go 117 to 127, chapter 9a, the beginning of chapter 9 next time.